Good afternoon and welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us at MarketSite, we have John Vail. He's the chief global strategist at Nikko Asset Management, and we're here to focus on U.S. and China trade deals. Quite the hot topic in the marketplace right now. John, it's great to have you for the first time with us on Trade Talks at the MarketSite. Let's talk about this. You think there's some positive signs based on the language that came out of the White House this week?
Yes, there's a lot of mixed signals for sure, because
Right.
each side is trying to hide their true negotiating stance. But from some of the things that Trump said, especially his comment about he thinks that Xi is willing to meet him halfway, President Xi that is, I think that's actually a very positive sign, because it shows that Trump, he himself, is willing to go halfway and not insist upon some of these things that China really says are impossible to negotiate.
Right. Sometimes it's hard to tell exactly how Trump reads things and what's actually put down onto paper, but there were some negative surprises as well.
Yes, the fact that China did not really come to the table with anything new, supposedly, we're told, it was quite discouraging. Whether that's true or not, I'm really not sure, because they spent a full 2 days talking. Lighthizer, who's the main pit bull for the tough negotiation stance for the U.S., he wasn't just sitting there twiddling his thumbs. So they were obviously talking about something. And China, in the past, has said they won't even discuss something like Made in 2025 program, but clearly they were discussing it now. So that's some progress. But the fact that they didn't really have anything concrete after 2 months was a bit disappointing.
Why is there global backlash to China 2025?
Well, China's basically been doing this sort of state-subsidized industry planning for a long time, but they were doing it in steel or doing it in lower tech areas. It's now that it finally comes into something which is actually competing head-on with what the U.S. and Japan and Europe are all wanting to do themselves. That's when it becomes more dangerous for these countries, and that's why they're so upset about this plan now.
So you're referring to 5G?
5G is in
part.
2025,
Right.
Semiconductors are in 2025, artificial intelligence, a lot of things that we want to excel in now. We weren't so interested in steel and some of these lower level areas, but we're very interested in the higher tech areas.
Let's go back to trade talks for a minute here. These typically happen behind the scenes. Is this the first time where it's out there in the public, and these negotiations have always been tough?
Yes. And I don't really know how to characterize the history of negotiations, but I mean, for instance, the new NAFTA negotiations were very sort of public and difficult to describe and to talk about. There was a lot of threats. This one is probably more serious just because people don't have confidence that a system like China, which is so different than, say, Canada,
Right.
can actually do a trade deal that's enforceable. And so that's why the market is more worried than other things.
But I mean, it's kind of always been like that.
It has. It's really become, in the last 5 years, but especially since Trump got elected, that the U.S., both the Democrats and the Republicans, have decided that something has to be done.
Because of the technology around it, and we're so vulnerable.
And the fact that on the democratic institutions side, China seems to be slipping. And we had hoped that it would be moving a bit more towards what we are like. In fact, they're moving in the opposite direction, towards a more dictatorial style.
Right. So do you think their China 2025 plan is going to come into fruition? What does the next 5 years look like, basically?
Well, China's always going to succeed with something.
Right.
I mean, they're very smart, they're very industrious, they're very determined. And so it's just a question of timing, is how long it takes before China becomes a leader in semiconductors. I personally think they pushed too far too fast. If they had done this more slowly and in cooperation with other countries, they would have had a much smoother path towards success. Right now, they're facing some gigantic hiccups, especially with 5G, where this long-standing plan that they've had to be a world leader in 5G has suddenly been squashed because they perhaps upset other foreign countries too much.
Do you think, are you concerned with the U.S. adopting a more isolationist point of view? We should be partnering with Japan and Europe and working more cohesively to tackle this problem.
Right. And unfortunately, Trump seemed to think that he needed to attack all these different situations at once. We have trade deficits with Europe, gigantic trade deficits with Europe. We have big, sort of a mixed picture with Japan, but Trump seems to think we could do more. So not only did he sort of go for the China stance, he also wanted to address the other countries too, and that hurt the cohesion. But in some areas, Japan and Europe are very, very close to U.S. position, especially on intellectual property rights and on state subsidies. And they are working together, as we speak, on WTO reform that will approach these issues with China. It's already been negotiated with China. We'll see how far they go. But China definitely knows it's an issue, and not just with the States, but with the rest of the developed world. So they're taking it seriously.
All right, well, this will be certainly an interesting development to follow up on. Thank you so much for joining us at MarketSite.
Thank you, Jill.
And thank you for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.